I've worked at the Hesburger restaurant for years. It's a small, unassuming place, nestled in the heart of the city. But within its walls, I've come to realize that horror doesn't always lurk in dark, abandoned places. Sometimes, it hides beneath the neon lights and behind the cheerful facade of a fast food joint. At first, I thought it was just another job, a way to make some quick cash during my college years. But as time passed, I began to notice the subtle signs that something was not quite right. It started with the way the manager, Mr. Jensen, always seemed on edge, as if he carried the weight of a terrible secret. He rarely spoke to us, us employees, and when he did, it was with a forced smile that never reached his eyes. One night, after the last customer had left and the lights had dimmed, I was tasked with closing up. It was a routine I had done countless times, but that night felt different. The air in the restaurant seemed heavier, suffocating, and the usual clatter of dishes and the hum of the fryers had transformed into an eerie silence. As I wiped down the tables, I could have sworn I heard faint whispers, like a soft murmur that danced on the edge of our hearing. I dismissed it as exhaustion, but as I reached for the mop to clean the floor, I saw something that made my heart stop. In the dim light, I noticed a shadowy figure in the corner of the dining area. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to face it, but there was no one there. Just an empty booth and the lingering feeling of being watched. Shivering, I locked the front door and hurried to the back to grab my belongings. The atmosphere in the restaurant had become oppressive, as if it was trying to push me out. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened here, something that refused to stay buried. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake that night from my mind. I tried to focus on my work, on the sizzle of the grill and the chatter of customers, but the restaurant had changed. It had become a place of dread, a building filled with secrets that were begging to be uncovered. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, I decided to confront Mr. Jensen. I found him in his office, the door slightly ajar. He was hunched over his desk, scribbling furiously on a piece of paper. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he wrote. When I knocked and entered, he quickly shoved the paper into a drawer and looked up at me with a forced smile. "What can I do for you, Mark?" he asked, his voice quivering. I hesitated for a moment, then blurted out, "I need to know what's going on here, Mr. Jensen. There's something wrong with this place. Something sinister." Mr. Jensen's smile faded, and his eyes bored into mine. "You don't want to know," he said in a hushed tone. "Some secrets are better left buried." But I couldn't let it go. I had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. That night, after my shift, I sneaked into Mr. Jensen's office. I knew it was a breach of trust, but the unease that had settled in my chest was unbearable. I had to know what he was hiding. I rifled through his desk until I found the paper he had been writing on earlier. As I read the words, my blood ran cold. It was a list of names of employees who had disappeared over the years. There were dates next to each name, and they corresponded to the time they had gone missing. My name was on that list, along with today's date. Fear clawed at me, and I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of papers. That's when I noticed a trapdoor hidden beneath the desk. With trembling hands, I opened it and descended into darkness. I found myself in a narrow tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. The air was stale, and a musty odor hung in the air. As I cautiously ventured further, I realized I was not alone. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and faint whispers echoed through the tunnel. The tunnel eventually led to a room that was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was filled with rows of shelves, each lined with jars. I approached one of the jars and peered inside. My heart lurched as I saw what was preserved within human organs, floating in a sickeningly yellow liquid. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This was a nightmare, a grotesque horror that defied explanation. What kind of place was this? What had Mr. Jensen been involved in? As I frantically searched for an exit, I heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, I ducked behind one of the shelves, praying that whoever was coming wouldn't see me. The footsteps grew louder, and I held my breath as a figure entered the room. It was Mr. Jensen, and he was not alone. He was accompanied by a group of people, all dressed in dark robes. They gathered around a large table in the center of the room, where a grotesque ritual was about to unfold. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror. They began chanting in a language I couldn't understand, and the jars on the shelves started to glow with an eerie, greenish light. It was as if the very air in the room was charged with malevolence. I couldn't tear my eyes away as they carefully removed one of the jars from the shelf and placed it on the table. Inside the jar was a heart, still beating. It pulsed with a sickening rhythm, and I realized with dread that it was my heart. They were sacrificing me. In that moment, I knew I had to escape. I had to run. I waited for the right moment, when their attention was fully focused on the ritual, and then I slipped out of the room and made a mad dash through the tunnel. The whispers and shadows seemed to follow me as I ran, their presence a constant reminder that I was not alone in this terrible place. I emerged from the tunnel and into the restaurant, gasping for breath. But the horror wasn't over. As I glanced around, I realized that the restaurant had transformed. The walls were oozing with a sickly, greenish substance, and the neon lights above flickered with an unnatural glow. The customers who had been there just moments ago were gone, replaced by shadowy figures who watched me with hollow eyes. I ran to the front door, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the very building was keeping me prisoner, refusing to let me go. I pounded on the glass, scrambling for help, but my cries went unheard. That's when I heard Mr. Jensen's voice behind me, cold and menacing. "You should have never come down here, Mark." I turned to face him, my eyes wide with terror. "What is this place? What are you people doing?" He smiled, a smile devoid of any humanity. "We're preserving the essence of this city, Mark. The city feeds on its inhabitants, and we offer it sustenance in exchange for power." I couldn't comprehend the madness of his words. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. But the fear coursing through my veins was all too real. As Mr. Jensen advanced toward me, I backed away, my mind racing for a way out. And then I remembered the trapdoor in his office. It was my only chance. With one last desperate glance at the nightmarish scene around me, I sprinted back into the tunnel. The tunnel felt longer this time, the shadows more menacing. I didn't dare look back, for fear of what I might see. Finally, I reached Mr. Jensen's office and slammed the trapdoor shut behind me. Gasping for breath, I locked the door and pushed his heavy desk against it. I had to make sure they couldn't follow me. Then, I collapsed to the floor, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually, the sun began to rise, casting a faint light into the room. The horrors of the night began to fade, replaced by a lingering sense of unease. Had it all been a hallucination? A nightmare brought on by stress and exhaustion? But as I looked at the list of names on the paper, I knew it was all too real. I had stumbled upon a dark secret hidden beneath the bustling Hesburger restaurant, a secret that defied explanation and still haunted my nightmares. I had escaped, but I knew I would never truly be free from the horrors of that place. And I couldn't help but wonder how many others had entered the restaurant, never to return, their fates sealed in jars on those darkened shelves. As I left the restaurant that morning, I couldn't help but glance back at the unassuming facade. The neon lights blinked innocently, and the smell of sizzling burgers filled the air. But beneath it all, I knew the true nature of the Hesburger restaurant, a place where darkness thrived, where secrets were buried, and where horrors lurked beneath the neon lights,